All right, I'm gonna need one device though that I can just use for the document. So what I'll do here is I'll go. All right, so this is what I was trying to do. Okay. All right, shalom everyone. I'm Brother Doug with my mom's sister Sharon right now. Some of our brothers and sisters will probably be in shortly. So we're going to be doing today, as usual, we're going to be doing a study. I don't know why this thing is so freaking uneven here. There we go. That's how it should look. All right, so we're going to be doing a short, brief study testing Acts. No, no. Testing Acts 29. And so we're going to be dealing with that. So let me just do something really quick. I wanted to get Google Docs on my other device here. So I'll need to be using Google Docs here. So just bear with me. I see Brother Dennis has just jumped in. Shabbat Shalom, Brother Dennis. We're about to start our study here. So we're going to be doing Acts. We're going to be testing Acts 29. I'm going to be going into some of the issues with the Acts 29 book. And let me just see here. Got to get this Google Docs thing open here. So some of the issues we're going to be dealing with is some of the similar doctrines in it are from other books that probably would have been written around the same time. This book claims to be from the first century. Sister Marissa is joining. Shabbat Shalom, Sister
Shabbat Shalom, sister.
Shabbat
We're doing,
shalom.
yeah, Shabbat Shalom. So we're doing a brief little study today called Testing Acts 29. This was kind of requested from Brother Yahusha for me to make a document on this and why I believe it's not scripture. Um, so we're going to be diving into that. Historically, it was falsely attributed to Paul. Historically, it was supposedly an extra letter in the book of Acts. But as soon as I can get my Google Doc open here, we're going to explore why it can't be scripture and its relation to other falsely attributed books like Fourth Ezra. That there seems to be a relationship with this book in Fourth Ezra. Um, it it actually even quotes the prophecy from Fourth Ezra as a real prophecy. So that's one of the problems in this book. So it also deals with American Israelism, that the American people are Israelites ethnically, and that basically it deals with what is it called? White supremacy, Israelitism. So like the idea that all Western nations would have been from Israel rather than the people that actually were from Israel, that actually do descend from Israel. So it completely um, it stuff like this also has been promoted in Mormonism. There's even the COG Church. I think their founder, he was a big proponent of British Israelism. Come to find out, I forget the guy's name. He founded the Worldwide COGs. Armstrong, Herbert Armstrong, promoted this false ideal. Um, Even though it seems like he didn't preach it a lot, it was one of his doctrines that he held on to. And for those that are wondering how I know this, all I did was type in Armstrongism, and there's a whole Wikipedia article about what he preached and some of the things he believed in. And so this was a common thing in Christianity to start trying to ascribe Israel to Christians. and trying to even look at ethnically Israel as Westerners, which makes no sense. So it's like it's a type of whitewashing, you could say. It's a type of whitewashing, like how Maccabee says the heathen painted the patriarchs in their image and all that. So there's actually proof that there was whitewashing to the Israelites, and why every movie you look at, they portray Israel as being like Italian looking or Irish looking or very pale white, which would have been very you know inaccurate historically for that region of the world. They would have been very dark skinned just to be in an area that's in the continent of Africa, no less. It would be impossible to have someone pale white. They even have the Egyptians pale white, which makes no sense because they're Hamites. The original Egyptians came from Ham, Ethiopia. So it's impossible for them to be the way they've been portrayed. And so this book, one of the points I'm going to get into here is that it deals with British Israelism and American Israelism, and it also so we're going to go to actual verses here in it to prove that I'm not making this stuff up. So let me just find an Acts 29 PDF real quick. Originally, I had to use the eSword version because it was so hard to get this PDF. It was so hard to find one for free. Let's see here if they even have of this online, because this was so hard to even get. I know some people that have the Sefer might have it, because that's the only Bible that's ever included it. Like I don't think any other canon has included it. Okay, here we go. Scripted.com, last chapter of Acts, quote unquote. Okay, so I'm going to read this for you guys. This is revised English version by Jeremy Cap. So it reads off talking about I, Paul, full Baracas of Messiah, determining to go to Spain. So it's talking about him going to Spain, for he had heard in Phoenicia that some of the children of Israel about the time of the Syrian captivity. Okay, so already it's claiming that some of the children of Israel, the northern house, in context, had escaped by they quote unquote escaped Assyrian captivity and went to the islands of Britain. Okay, right there in verse 3 in Acts 29. Okay, so it's claiming that the northern house, Ephraim, is Britain, or that they would have went to Britain. So no, right there, number one issue we have in Acts 29. Shabbat Shalom, brother Yahusha. So we're at Acts 29, verse 3, or I think it's verse 2 to be specific. Right here, the biggest problem is it's already promoting British Israelism. Right here, it's saying that some of the Assyrian captivity escaped here. That no historical record of this happening. We have no actual inspired scripture saying that happened. From the time of the Assyrian captivity up in the New Testament time period, nowhere is that ever like referenced. So that's something only this book would promote. And other books like it, like Fourth Ezra. So that's the biggest problem I have right away. Then it says, and the master commanded the good news to be preached far from here to the Gentiles and to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 3, I even have a problem with, because the lost sheep of the house of Israel, that was commanded back then in his ministry, in Yahusha's ministry. That was already fulfilled. They already did that when they went, what was it, 2x2s, mom? Or whatever he sent. I think he sent even 70. They're back in the book of Matthew, that would have been already fulfilled, that commandment. So there would be no reason to be preaching to the lost house of Israel in Britain. To me, that's too much of a stretch to me in verse 3 of this book. That's unless I'm misunderstanding this, that he's literally referencing that commandment from Matthew and the Besorah accounts and referencing it. The author's referencing it that it still needs to be fulfilled with him going to Britain and finding the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So to me, that would be a huge issue historically, because we have no historical backing that Paul ever did this, that he ever went to Britain to find the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So they took shipping in Astrolium. Okay. And talks about Paul preaching mightily in Spain. Okay. Hill country, for they heard of the conversion of the apostles and the many miracles which he had done. Okay. Again, verse 7, he departed out of Spain, and Paul and his company found a ship in America, sailing to Britain. So now they're trying to promote even the American Israelism. Okay, and sailed in it and passed along the south coast until they reached a port called Raphanus. Now, when it was voiced abroad, the apostles landed on their coast. The Havens met them, and they treated Paul courteously, and he entered into an eastern gate of their city and lodged in the house of a Hebrew, one of his own nation. So it's saying that somehow, and I'm not saying that there can't be individuals that were Hebrew in Britain. What I'm trying to say is, though, this book is preaching that basically that like large groups of the Northern House would have been in Britain. That's what this book is preaching. Okay. So there's a difference between that and Yahuwah's people scattered in every nation. I do understand that there's a prophecy about everyone being scattered, but there's no prophecy that says that the Assyrian captivity would go to Britain. There's no prophecy that ever said that. So just to clarify there. He came in Mount Lud. Okay. Set apart spirit fell upon Paul, and this is one of the worst things it says in this book, verse 10 of Acts 29. In the last, never mind. We're not at the pilot part yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. The open and the esteem of the inheritance will shine out before them. Okay, so it's talking about the restoration of Israel there in verse 10. In the latter days, the news of good news shall issue out of Jerusalem. Okay, verse 11 is talking about that as well. Okay, this is another weird thing. Now, I can't clarify. Maybe Brother Yahusha could clarify whether verse 13 would be plausible or not, because this is going to start talking about the Druids and all of that. It came to pass that some of the Druids came to Paul privately, showed by their rites and ceremonies that they were descended from the Yahudim, which escaped from bondage in the land of Egypt. And the apostles believed these things and gave them the kiss of Shalom. So I can't say whether that's a contradiction or not. I'm not too versed in the whole history of the Druids and whether we have evidence that Hebrew. I can't really say. So, I'll reserve my comment on that, but you know, I would definitely want to see some concrete evidence on that before I would accept that, because that. Yeah, go ahead, bro. I don't know if you were trying to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I did have some stuff to add on to the study towards the end. I wanted to share um just the stuff that I found that it has like no, there's like only maybe 10 to 20% of it remaining, and so there's like absolutely no way that you can reconstruct that. I did want to go into, if possible, some of that stuff.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we're pretty much almost at the end here. The only thing else I got to comment on is really the pilot stuff here. Let me see here. Druids. Okay, we talked about the Druids. Paul opened his heart to them, told them considering among themselves. Okay, that's verse 17. Much preaching and labor. Okay, verse 18. Immediately stream gushed out of the mountain and washed his body, broken in pieces. Okay, so this is where it gets really weird. So according to this book, also Pilate committed suicide. Okay, so it says in verse 17, I guess going into 18 here, they came to him, some of Belgians, to inquire of him. So now you have Belgians supposedly there, of him, of the new doctrine, and of the man Yahusha. I don't like how it says the man Yahusha, not the man Yahusha. I like that, but I don't like how it says the new doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little weird to me. So this is already screaming Christianity, that Yahusha preached a different message than the Old Testament. You know what I'm saying? And Paul opened his heart to them and told them all the things that happened to him. Now, how it happened that Messiah Yahusha came into the world to save sinners, and they departed, considering among themselves the things which they heard. And after much preaching and labor, Paul and his fellow laborers past Helvetia came to Mount Pontius Pilate, where who condemned, and again, he never condemned Yahusha. Okay. The context of the New Testament is that Pilate's hands were tied. He even cleansed his hands and he said, I'm clean in this matter. Okay. Pilate never thought he was guilty for Yahusha's death. Okay. Number one. So that's contradictory right there. He never condemned him. Who condemned Yahusha was his own people. If you really want to go into the New Testament, okay, his own people condemned him. They even said, "Let his blood be on us and our children." Okay, and by the way, Yahuwah honored that, because if you ever noticed, after 70 A.D., there's been a time where they've been blinded, and many Yahudim were not coming to the faith. Okay, so Yahuwah didn't disagree with that. Them saying that his blood would be on them, not on Pilate. So anyway, so that debunks that. Okay. So let's see here. So it says he supposedly Pilate condemned the Master Yahusha, dashed himself headlong, and so miserably perished. So it claims that Pilate would have killed himself because of his guilt. And then it talks about he was immediately broken in pieces into a lake. Paul stretched out his hands upon water, prayed to the Master, saying, "O Yahuwah, Eluah, give a sign for all the nations that hear Pontius Pilate, which condemned your only begotten Son." He didn't condemn him. Plunged head down, headlong into the pit. And while Paul was speaking, a great earthquake came, and the face of the waters was changed, and the form of the lake was like that of the Son of Man hanging in agony upon the stake. And the voice came out of heaven, saying, "Even Pilate has escaped the wrath to come, for he washed his hands before the multitude at the blood of the shedding of the Master Yahusha." So you have the book contradicting itself. So you have Yahusha himself saying that Pilate should have no guilt on him, but yet he had guilt on himself and killed himself. So there's a lot of that is contradictory. When therefore Paul and those that were with him saw the earthquake and heard the voice of the messenger, they esteemed Eluah and were greatly strengthened in the spirit. And at the end here, you have some footnotes. I can share with you guys this PDF from scribd.com. But clearly there's a lot of stuff wrong here. I'm trying to see here. Verse 2, I forgot too. It clearly claims that 4th Ezra supposedly is real prophecy, because it says that those of the Assyrian captivity escaped, went to the isles of Britain that were spoken by the prophets. So it's claiming that Ezra would have prophesied of them, of the Assyrian captivity going to Britain. So now, for you to believe that Acts 29, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I'm going to let Brother Yahusha go after this. The last thing I'm going to say about this is, for you to believe that this letter is legitimate, you would have to already accept the heretical book of 4th Ezra. So literally, you would have to accept a pseudepigraphal book that's not inspired to accept this letter, because it depends on one another. And there's many of them that depend on one another. Like for you to accept the Apocalypse of Baruch, right? 2nd or 4th Baruch, whatever it's called, you would have to accept 4th Ezra as scripture, because they have similar theology. So Anyway, but brother, I'm gonna let you go because I know you wanted to share some things. I think you're muted.
Oh, uh, yeah, I didn't realize y'all were recording. I hopped on late. I thought y'all were just chatting. So I
Oh no,
apologize.
no, this is recording. Yep.
Um, but so when you look into this book and you look into what actually exists, uh, let me just read it. It says, okay, so the main reason Acts 29 cannot be considered scripture is because the majority of it, roughly 80 to 90%, is completely missing. What remains is only small fragments, and those fragments are not enough to verify the original text meaning, context, or authenticity. People have taken those few remaining pieces and attempted to reconstruct an entire chapter, essentially making up what they think it might have said. This means that any full version of Acts 29 is not an ancient document, but a modern fabrication based on guesswork. A few additional points: no manuscript evidence. The earliest Greek manuscripts of Acts stop at chapter 28. If Acts 29 ever existed, it has been completely lost, apart from a handful of unreliable sources. Some of the Acts 29 texts floating around today are outright fabrications from the 19th or 20th century, often linked to the Samini manuscript, which has no historical credibility. If only 10 to 20% of a text remains, there's no way to reconstruct it accurately. It's like trying to rewrite an entire book based on a few sentences. Canonical issues. Even if Acts 29 did exist at one point, without solid textual evidence, there's no way to test it against the Tanakh and the rest of Scripture. So, I mean, clearly it's not Scripture.
For everyone, it would be like taking the Palestinian Targum, which is extremely fragmented, right? Which is actually scripture, but it's been so fragmented. But what they've done is they take a book fragmented like that and then added everything else to it. So you don't even know what was originally there and what wasn't anymore, is what they're trying to say. Which to me, yeah, makes sense. If it's been extremely fragmented and they've added so much to it, you don't know what was there initially. At least with the Targums, we can see if it's a fragmented Targum, they leave them empty, omitted. So we can see what was there and what's missing. With what they did with Acts 29, it seems like the case is that they even had less than what a fragmented Targum would have, and they pretty much just filled in everything. Like 90% of it was filled in. So whatever was there before it was filled in would have not been enough even for a book. So or for a letter. So there you're pretty much just trusting in a vain, you know, imaginary what's the word I'm looking for? A vain imaginary made up work as scripture for those that defend Acts 29. My assumption is that whoever filled in Acts 29, this is just my opinion, can't prove it, was either knew the authors of Fourth Ezra and the Apocalypse of Baruch, or it was the same author, because there's too many of the same doctrines. Possibly someone that knew the authors of the Book of Adam and Eve too, because it seems like there's a lot of like suicide in these books, and it's very weird. I think the I forget. I think the Gnostics and the Greeks, they believed that you could become divine by like escaping the shell of your body. So I could see a Gnostic wanting to write a book like that, because to them it's like your human body's a prison you need to escape. That's what they believe. They believe that everything physical is evil. Everything physical is evil. Your spirit is trapped in your body and it needs to be released. And the only way to do that is to die. So this is why they have these weird mythologies in Greek mythology, like Hercules. For him to become a god, he had to die. his spirit had to escape his body for him to become, Olympian or whatever. So there's a lot of that seems to be tied in with the whole suicide thing and why they would want to commit suicide, why they would want to write about stuff about suicide, because it's like it's promoting the idea that you got to, kill yourself to become divine. That's just my opinion on it. I've seen too many of these books that have similar themes like suicide, British Israelism, American Israelism, um, you know, and like I'm saying, I really haven't formed an opinion on the Druid thing. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, but that I don't see a problem with that being true, but that would be like the only thing in that book that possibly could be true. Everything else seems like fabricated, um, forced in there, forced to promote this idea that the British people of today are Israelites, which the Queen believes in. Yeah. Like if you talk to these royals today, they think they come from Judah. This is a false heretical belief system by a lot of white supremacists. And I was talking about that earlier before brother jumped on, is that this promotes a big white supremacy, British and American Israelism doctrine, which kind of shows who could have wrote it. It would have had to been someone from, that would have believed stuff like that. Go ahead.
Okay, so the Druid and the British part, the Druid part of the chapter and the British part of the chapter aren't even in the actual fragments themselves, apparently. And for anyone who wants to know where I'm getting my information, I'm pulling it from Chat GPT. And if anyone wants to say that, okay, well, Chat GPT is not always accurate, I make sure that I have it send me all the sources of where it's pulling from so that I can double check it myself. I'm not stupid. So it says, no, the Druid and British sections of Acts 29 are not found in any actual ancient fragments. Those parts come from the Sanini manuscript. I think we need to look into that and figure out what that is. That's the second time I've heard that. Which is widely considered a forgery with no historical credibility. The actual fragments of what some call Acts 29 are extremely limited, and they do not mention Britain, Druids, or anything related. The entire narrative about Paul traveling to Britain and interacting with Druids is a much later invention with no manuscript evidence to support it. So any version of Acts 29 that includes those elements is entirely fabricated and has no connection to genuine ancient text.
Yeah. And I know there's going to be people out there that say it's in the Sefer and this and that. I'm like, okay, but what's also in the Sefer? What also did Stephen Pidgeon put in his Bible? Okay, he put Jubilees in there. Okay, I'm not going to trust someone that thinks Jubilees is scripture. That give any credit to their canon when they're putting stuff like Jubilees in their Bible and Jasher in their Bible, midrashes in their Bible. Okay, Talmudic midrashes are what Jasher and Jubilees really are, or even Kabbalistic. You could even say like Jubilees is a mixture of Kabbalism and Talmudicism all rolled up into one. So if you guys are not aware of that, of our opinion about Jubilees and Jasher, I recommend you watch the videos on the page here. I can even give you guys a link to all the apocryphal books we've done studies about. But yeah, I'm just looking right now from my computer here what Stephen Pidgeon has to say to see if he has any type of argument for why it should be scripture, and pretty much nothing. He's just pretty much just assuming that it's scripture. So he has something about T.G. Cole in 1801. So he's quoting some guy from 1801. Yeah. So the guy that he's quoting from is claiming that they're doing a service of the Father by restoring this, which I would disagree. I would utterly disagree, and that's not proof to me. That's just he's quoting a guy's opinion. So other than that, there's no real proof that he gives for why he thinks it's legitimate. Like a lot of the books he includes jubilees, he never gives a real answer why. So that's another thing too, is like just because it's in a Bible doesn't make it inspired. Just because it was included in a canon doesn't mean it's inspired. I could tell you how many apocryphal books we've tested on this ministry that are in some type of canon that are not inspired. Okay. Ascension of Isaiah technically at one point was in the Armenian Orthodox canon. Okay. There's been multiple books that are in so-called canons that are still not inspired. Man decides a canon. Yahuwah, this is the thing what people got to understand. Yahuwah has his word. He never made a canon, but he had his word, and that's it. Men have decided to make canons. Men have decided to add books and take books away. That's all an invention of man when you talk about canons. Okay, so when we talk about that's not proof of anything, because I know people are going to comment on this and say, well, it's in my Sefer. Oh, good. Okay. Stephen Pidgeon thinks it's inspired. I disagree. It's that simple. That's going to be my answer. And there's a lot of things I disagree with Stephen Pidgeon on. I don't agree with him about Jubilees. I don't agree with him about Jasher. He puts a little too much stock in the Masoretic Hebrew text, which I don't agree with him on. So there's many things I disagree with him on. So, just please, like, if your only response, I don't mind you guys commenting on the comment section, but if your only response back for a dialogue, if it's in my Sefer, please don't comment that. Okay, that's not a legitimate response. That's not a legitimate argument. Okay. Anyway, so but yeah, I agree with Brother Yahusha. The fact that this book historically has been proven that 90% of it has been made up, you can't call that scripture. You just can't. I don't care how much you want to call it scripture, it's not.
Yeah.
Acts 29 is probably like one of the worst ones if that's the case. If 10% of it, only 10% of it was originally in that fragment. That means a man or whoever, a scribe somewhere, just made up some stuff, added to it, and then called it, a lost chapter of Acts. At least with these other books, there's actually proof of earlier manuscript traditions of almost every word that's in there. Like, I'll give you an example. The Book of Enoch. There's multiple manuscript traditions of every chapter that's in that book. Even when you talk about the Greek manuscripts of Enoch, okay, the Greek one that I have in my Lexham, there's at least 89 chapters in that. That means that at least 80 to 85% of what we have, what is it called? So 85% of what we have in English translations can be found in multiple manuscript traditions of Enoch versus this book, where 85, 90% of it didn't exist until people added to it. Okay, so that to me is the issue. It's not even a full chapter. It's of extremely fragmented work. There's no way you can consider that scripture. So now, again, so I would recommend you guys test it for yourself. Honestly, even if it was originally there, a lot of those doctrines are heretical. The idea that Pilate was the one to condemn Yahusha is not scriptural. The idea that you had British Israelism wasn't a thing until Christianity came around. Okay, that was a made-up doctrine that's heretical. There's multiple doctrines in the book that are heretical, that don't line up with the Bible. So even if you want to ignore what Brother Yahusha said and you want to choose to believe that it originally was there, if you test it against the actual scriptures, it will fail. It will contradict things. So anyway, so hopefully you guys hopefully this was edifying for you guys, and hopefully it made you start thinking about literature like this. And again, the one last thing I just want to say is just because a Bible has a book in it doesn't mean it's scripture. I'm talking about Apocrypha. I'm not talking about Genesis to Revelation. I'm talking about Apocrypha. Just because a Catholic Bible has all these added books in it doesn't mean every one of those books are scripture. Doesn't, whatever canon you're talking about, or Greek Orthodox, Catholic, the Sefer, whatever. These are men that have opinions that based on their opinions, they're including those books. It's not, Yahuwah had his word. He had Genesis to Revelations. He also had certain books that are inspired outside of Genesis and Revelations, but not every apocryphal book is inspired. So again, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about the canons and all that, and that Constantine was the one to remove all the books. Listen, Constantine had nothing to do with it. You can research it for yourselves. The Protestants were the ones that removed those from the King James Bible, number one. So Protestants are not perfect, okay? The Protestants removed all of the Apocrypha. Some of the Apocrypha, I agree, should be scripture because they were literally appendixes. To the books. Like I'll give you an example. Like Bell and the Dragon was I think 14 originally of Daniel. Susanna was originally 13 of Daniel. Okay, some of those were just appendixes and were part of original books that they decided to separate for whatever reason. There's even additions to Esther, where it says, Greek additions to Esther in your Septuagint. They're not additions. They were originally part of the Greek Esther that the Masoretic text did not want to include. So some of those are legitimate in scripture, but not all of those are. Like Tobit, weird books like Tobit and Third Ezra and or sometimes called First Esdras. Some of those were fabrications. Like I forget who it is. I think it's Josephus talks about First Esdras is like he takes First Esdras over the book of Ezra for its chronology or whatever, or I forget its genealogies or whatever. So if you look at like certain historical quotes, these some of these books literally directly opposed the books of scripture. First Esdras did, Tobit did, Ecclesiasticus has contradictions. We just did that book recently. Okay. They're still on the fence whether Judith was historically accurate or not. There's still people don't even know whether Judith really was a satire or not. It possibly could have been a satire, a historical satire, not to even be taken seriously. Okay, so not every book that was in the 16 books of the Apocrypha was scripture. So that's another thing. When you study for yourself, you'll find that. Good question, Sister Marissa. I would not call Acts 29 even commentary. The reason I say that is historically, it's not even accurate. To consider that Ephraim as a whole or the northern house went to Britain and isolated like in one country, that whole British Israelism, even historically, that's not proven. We still have yet to find out, even if the Druids are 100% correct, whether they would have had Hebrews in the Druids of Europe. So until I would not even consider this commentary. I would consider this really not worth anything. Yeah. Oh, what happened? Let me see here. I think I misunderstood. I would consider like some of the books that we've done as culturally relevant, culturally important, interesting books like the Apocalypse of Abraham. I would consider culturally important for certain things. That because of the contents in it, it shows what they believed at that time and how already the oneness was getting corrupted at that time. And I would say it definitely has some cultural relevance, some of those books, but definitely not inspired. For example, like they're in the Apocalypse of Abraham was the one of the most recent ones we did. You can find on the YouTube page here. There's certain positive things like it talks about the four living creatures being cherubim, or it talks about that the wheels within the wheels is a vision of the cherubim. It talks about that it illustrates what Satan might have looked like in the garden, or what they thought Satan looked like in the garden versus what we think he looked like, or what we've been lied to and through Christian tradition, mainstream Christian tradition of what he looked like. So there's certain things in that book that kind of expose modern Christianity that at one point Christianity didn't even believe some of these traditions, because supposedly that book is like part Christian, part Jewish or whatever. So like the whole forbidden fruit thing being an apple, it kind of exposes that of not being true, which probably it borrows from Enoch most likely. It or misunderstands Enoch, what Enoch's talking about. But either way, it shows that the forbidden fruit wasn't an apple. It shows, so there's certain things culturally that there might be some relevance to those pseudepigraphal books, but I wouldn't. I for the viewers out there, I would not confuse cultural relevance or historical relevance to scripture. So I wouldn't even call those books out there commentary. I more call them like their cultural references. They might have some little importance to them. But and a lot of those out there, the problem is that they had multiple authors. A lot of these books have multiple authors. They have multiple belief systems in one book, so they contradict one another. You'll see that in Ascension of Isaiah, Apocalypse of Abraham. You'll see that in a lot of these books, they're like part Christian, part Jewish. Another thing, the Apocalypse of Abraham, that has a lot of cultural relevance is whoever wrote it understood the idea that and this is a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, but they understood even back then in the late first century of predestination, because there's a scripture that they claim that those that love sin were predestined to be the devil's children. So, and that those that loved righteousness were predestined to be Yahuwah's children, like sheep versus goats. So the author expounded on, I think, Matthew 25 in the scriptures, and he gave a whole like narrative of, supposedly Yahuwah explained to Abraham why these certain individuals will be goats and all that. And he talks about how they love sin. So they would adore the devil because they love sin. So there are certain cultural relevance. I guess it's similar to commentary, but I don't even think I would put those books even on a commentary level. They're more of like a cultural, interesting cultural literature for understanding certain things that the earlier Hebrews might have believed in at that time, in the first century to second century AD, and certain things that even Christians at that time believed in that don't believe in today. Like today, if you talk about predestination, you get kicked out of a church building. But back then that was something that they just understood what election is. They understood that concept. Whether it be the Hebrews or the Christians, they understood election, which Judaism today doesn't. I looked it up recently. They don't believe in any form of predestination whatsoever. So it seems like both Christianity and Judaism have apostatized so much that they don't even recognize biblical stuff like that anymore. So yeah, but anyway, so that's how I look at those extra books. They're interesting references, like a reference book. They are not scripture. A lot of those pseudepigraphas, that's all I can take them for. Some of them I would not even use them as a reference book culturally, because there's so much leaven in them. Some of them I would just leave them alone. Like for example, the Talmud, not the Talmud, but the Jasher and Jubilees, they're not even important for referencing, because there's so much leaven in them that even historical leaven in them, and it's like I wouldn't even want to touch them. They're as bad as the Talmud to me. Books like Jasher and Jubilees, I wouldn't even want to touch because they're so got so much leaven in them where it's almost 100% leaven. I don't even want to mess with them. So that's just my personal opinion on that. But anyway, that was a good tube question. So that's about it for today. Hopefully, you guys, hopefully this was educational for people out there that don't know about this chapter, that are just being led astray by people saying this is a lost chapter of Acts. Again, there's all the claims about this book being a lost chapter and that it was originally part of Acts. There's no historical proof for that. That's just a claim. Okay, there's no proof that there was ever Acts 29. This was this is basically just a fragmented piece of literature that someone decided, okay, this is extremely fragmented. Let me add to this. And the problem is when something's that fragmented, all you have is fiction at that point. Mm-hmm. Let's say, like, for give you an example, like I was saying before, let's say I got a piece of paper of stuff I wrote as a book, right? Now, let's say that the only bit of this book that I wrote that can be traced back to a prior manuscript is like 5-10% of it. You basically have just someone's opinion in a book. That's essentially what you have. Okay, you have some author's opinion of what happened, during Paul's last travels, and so anyway, but to me personally, even comparing this book to like Third Corinthians, last thing I want to say here, even when you compare this to Third Corinthians has way more of a chance being scripture than this. Third Corinthians pretty much word for word says what the Brit Hadashah says, but goes along the lines of being a letter from Paul that it was his last warning to the Corinthians about these Gnostic doctrines they were inheriting. Mm-hmm. They were even inheriting evolution because he called it the doctrine of the serpent. Yeah. He said, those of you that adhere, if any of you that see those that adhere, that what was created by Yahuwah was not created by him, they have held to the doctrine of the serpent. So any atheists out there, if you think you're atheist and you're evolutionary, nah. To believe in evolution, you can't be an atheist. Okay? You're literally just being pimped by Satan. Okay? That's all that's happening there. Satan's making you believe that Yahuwah is not the creator, and that he's that everything just kind of poof happened. That's a doctrine of the serpent. Okay, and that's why Third Corinthians I really recommend people get into, because it's refuting Gnosticism. It seems like it was written by Paul as his last stitch effort with the Corinthians that were becoming apostate. In context, historically, the Corinthians were becoming very apostate. It's like, listen, you got, and he reiterates to them about the resurrection like he does in the other Corinthian letters. He says, listen, this is my last time. This is like the last warning, and he's talking about stuff like the virgin birth in it, the resurrection and all that, because they were going away from all that stuff, Anyway, so hopefully this was a baraka to you guys out there today.